Okay, today I want to talk to you about the top 5 charts of the week. I'm going to talk about what it is, why I decided to launch it. I'll take you through the latest report, so some of the insights there, and that's going to cover global growth, US credit, and quite a bit on emerging markets. So if you want to skip straight to the juicy insights, then I'll put a time in the description of this video that you can skip there. And then at the end, I'm going to talk about, or take you through how to sign up and a few reasons why you might want to sign up. So first of all, what is it? Well, it's actually what we're looking at right here. This is the weekly email, top 5 charts of the week. So this comes out about sometime on Tuesday, New Zealand time. If it's a good week, maybe it'll come out earlier in the day. If it's a week where I'm, digging deeper, maybe it'll come out later in the day. So basically, what it is 5 charts, as you can see here, and beyond the charts, having a good chart that you've never seen before, I'm sure that some of these will come into that category, is good. But then also having, some relatively in-depth comments, not a essay or a novel, but some comments that dig into some of the detail and some of the implications around the chart. A bit of the so what. That can actually be quite value added rather than, often on Twitter I'll just chat the chart up there with, sometimes can be a little bit of a smart ass comment, or just, some little brief comment that can be a little bit ambiguous, but this takes any ambiguity out of it and talks directly about the, why that chart is relevant and why you need to be paying attention to it and what implications it has for investing, in terms of risks or opportunities, or just the global outlook as in this one. And also, we've got that key point there, so it's kind of like a key takeaway. If you don't read the comments, you just read that and they'll tell you, like for this one, global trade growth is set to trough in Q1, turn positive in Q2, as you can see by the leading indicator there. And then finally, this is actually a paid product that I offer as part at Top Down Charts. It's basically the entry level version of what I'm doing. So I have a institutional service which is more for like fund managers and large institutional investors, where they have the demand and the budget for that kind of more personalized and highly in-depth service. Whereas this is more for the average punter who's looking for an extra flow of insights and ideas at a reasonable price. And the other thing, actually on that note, is that I'm very happy to take kind of like requests, I guess, from readers. So I often get um, you know I don't know about requests, but certainly questions like, for example, in this week, I've got 3 charts here on emerging markets. That was actually in response. I had one subscriber asking me if I'd changed my views on emerging markets given some of the things going on in China. And, we'll get to this in the second half, but basically this is a direct response to that. So I'd like to think that it's quite responsive to the demands and interests of the subscribers as well. So that's there's quite an interesting feature of it as well. In terms of why I decided to launch this, so yeah, as you kind of gathered, it helps kind of fill that gap in my offering that I used to have, where it was just the institutional service, and I do a lot on social media, and I had people asking me, um, what have you got to offer? And for somebody with a small portfolio and a small budget, and who perhaps was largely focused on US stock picking, my service, which is designed for a multi-asset portfolio manager, you know, who's managing, a couple billion with a large research budget, there was an obvious mismatch there. So having something that I could actually offer to those people was quite good. I think, I kind of owe it to my followers to have something available in that space. And I think I'll probably introduce other things over time as well. But the other thing, from a business standpoint, um, having a sort of a smoother source of cash flows, because this one you can either pay annually or quarterly, is is also a good thing, because if in the institutional space you have, you know you might have, say, 20 odd clients, and they might pay large bills, but it might be sort of quarters apart, and you get these sort of air pockets where between large invoices, and the keeping the lights on aspect is certainly an important consideration. But the other thing it does is, for those professional institutional investors, fund managers, it can actually be a good way of kind of trying me out first, and having a bit of a glimpse of what I'm doing with the institutional service, and I think it's definitely good for that, and it's also a good vehicle for a bit of thoughts and research between the publishing cycles of the other reports that I do. So that's basically what it is. It's a retail, or my entry level offering, and that's probably the key features there. So this is probably a good time to get into the second part of the video, where I'm going to go through some of the insights. So I'll take you through actually these 5 charts and the commentary and what they mean. So the first chart here is, you can see, global trade growth. The blue line there is ISL, or RWI ISL. It's a global shipping organization, and that tracks container volume throughput at some of the world's largest ports. It was interesting to see there in December, so this is the results for December, there was basically a collapse there, and it's both alarming and at the same time kind of unsurprising, because if you look at that black line there, that's another tracker of global trade volume growth. So that specifically it's world import volume growth. That series is put together by the CPB, and that one had actually gone negative previously. So in some ways it's the blue line catching down. Why would you actually even use these two together? I just like to have multiple different series which can either confirm or give an earlier lead on each other. And certainly on that respect, the blue data comes out a lot earlier, and I think at least a month or two in advance of the black line. So when you're dealing with historical data, one, you're already kind of on the back foot because it's backwards looking, and two, you often find that it's a couple of months old by the time you actually get the stuff. But having these two, it's quite good to give you a picture of what's going on there, or what was going on in the past. The red line, so that's made of the global manufacturing PMIs. So I've selected a group of countries that are basically representative. These are ones that are quite highly involved in global trade, and in terms of their GDP weight and their export-import orientation. And I use the export-import orders indexes, sub-indexes of their manufacturing PMIs, and it lines up fairly well historically with global trade growth. And the key implication of that is that it looks like global trade growth is actually going to worsen a little bit in the short term. It looks like we're going to see the trough in Q1. So that lowest point there is actually January. So that red line leads. So I've got it leading there, leading by about 5 months. So it looks like it's going to worsen into January, and then start to rebound thereafter. And that's basically the key takeaway there. In terms of what's actually going to drive that rebound, Well, there's a few things that are already in the system. So we saw massive monetary easing last year across the world. A lot of Asian economies have stepped up fiscal stimulus, or at least, announced substantial programs. And we've also actually seen a nascent trend of improving business confidence in the last few months. And that red line is actually one of those. But there's quite a few others as well. And you look across developed economies, certainly in particular, the property markets are still going strong, and pretty much as a result, the consumers are going pretty good as well. So, there's certainly some risks out there, such as the coronavirus outbreak, but it's definitely not all doom and gloom. And while we have gone through and probably still slightly are in the middle of a global export and industrial production recession, it looks like that is going to be drawing to a close in the near future. And so, yeah, the key point there, global trade growth is set to trough in Q1 and turn positive in Q2. Credit Managers Index. So this is a very interesting data set here. It's something that I've been tracking quite closely the last couple of years. And, so you're probably familiar with the PMI, but this is the CMI. So that's the Credit Managers version of the PMI, which is the Purchasing Managers Index. Now, one thing about this is that they split their sub-indexes into two kind of major sub-indexes, which is favorable index and unfavorable index. So I'll just read from the notes here. The unfavorable index tracks things like filings for bankruptcy, disputes, amounts beyond terms, credit application rejections, accounts placed for collection, etc. All the bad things, right? So, and so they've designed the index so that readings above 50 indicate an improving situation. So that would be, for example, less filings for bankruptcy. And readings below 50 would be, more filings for bankruptcy. So, the best way to make that abundantly clear is to compare and contrast a couple of periods. So if we look at 2007, 2008, you saw, sharp deterioration in that, where, obviously creditors were going to come under a lot of pressure then. In contrast, 2013, which was probably one of the strongest growth years in in recent history, is you saw this significant uptick there in the performance of the unfavorable index. So that would have been less bankruptcy filings, better payment performance, and all the rest of it. So I'll just briefly cover what the favorable index is before I go into the implications of the unfavorable index. So the favorable index is things like where we got sales, credit extended, new applications for credit, and collections. Obviously, the better the economy is going, the better that one's going to be performing. Like in 17-18, we saw very much substantial optimism by credit managers in that period. But the one that I really wanted to focus on is that unfavorable index, because we've seen this steady and consistent trend upwards in that recently. And if you're sitting there saying, oh, the US economy is slowing down, it's going into recession, things are bad, you would expect to see that would actually be trending down. So obviously that kind of narrative is actually not the case at all. As a matter of fact, the key point here what I've got is that US private creditor performance has been improving significantly. And you see there, so I've smoothed these out. That's the 3-month moving average in the thick line there. The light line is the actual monthly reading, and that one is the highest point since late 2014 there. So that's, if you're looking for signs of an imminent recession, you'd be disappointed with this data set. If you're looking for signs that things are actually decent, possibly even improving in some respects, then this is one that's going to tick the box on that sense. So I thought that was quite interesting. Definitely doesn't align with some of the doom and gloom bearish stories that we're hearing out there. Number 3, so this is where we're going to get into emerging markets. The last 3 charts here are actually on emerging markets. So the first one here, I'm going to read this to you actually. So regular readers might remember when I first introduced this weird indicator back in August last year. It combines the signals from monetary conditions inversely, so more stimulus equals closer to the green line, and valuations, cheaper, would be closer to the green line, and sentiment, more bearish, would be closer to the green line. So in an ideal world, the lowest possible reading of that indicator would come when sentiment is completely washed out, valuations are very cheap, and monetary stimulus is being stepped up, which, i.e., would be the ideal conditions for buying EM equities over the medium-term time frame. So basically, the closer you are to the green line, the better the odds are for medium-term investors, and the closer you are to the yellow line, the greater the risks are. And I show this chart, but yeah, as I mentioned, had a question about emerging market equities, and this chart is one of the key reasons why I continue to have a core bullish medium-term view on emerging market equities. And I mean, that's basically, the key takeaway there. But, there are a couple of other things to think about, and sentiment is one of them. So one of the components of that previous chart is the composite sentiment score, which we've got down here in the red line. And that combines the signals from sovereign CDS pricing for emerging market countries, emerging market equity implied volatility, fund flows into emerging market equity products, the emerging markets economic surprise index, and a few other things. And so after spending most of 2019 in the bearish side, we saw this really significant shift to bullishness there. And so one thing that we can say with certainty about this is that long EM or bullish EM equities is no longer the contrarian player that it was back in August when I was talking about that. But I wouldn't necessarily turn bearish on emerging market equities just because of sentiment. I mean, clearly there has been a shift, and you actually see that elsewhere with things like the BAML survey, the Centix survey, and fund manager outlooks. But typically the signal to get short or to be changing the view here would come when the reading becomes very extreme, like just mousing over a couple of very extreme readings, or when it goes very high and starts to roll over. Those are typically the most bearish signals that you can get from sentiment. But the other thing is that like all indicators, you don't look at them in a vacuum. You consider them alongside these other things like I have in that previous chart. If valuation's still not excessively expensive, like if valuation's still cheap, then you'd be inclined to override the signal, any bearish signals from sentiment. And if monetary stimulus was going full bore and the economy was starting to stabilize, those would be the kind of things that would make you override that signal. And and the thing is that the whole purpose of using sentiment is that the crowd tends to be wrong at extremes, but then there are times where the crowd is actually right, and that's tends to be through the range. And so that's sentiment, but then there's also another thing which is also quite fast moving. Sentiment's quite fast moving, and also quite useful tactically from a risk management standpoint, because sentiment's good for risk management. The risk of being long when it's too frothy, and the risk of being underexposed when it's all washed out. But technicals can be really useful for framing price sort of levels and triggers, which can be useful for risk management. And that brings us to the last chart here. And so this is a chart of emerging markets market breadth. So this is country breadth. So it's the percentage of countries in the MSCI emerging markets universe that are above their 200-day moving average. And I guess at a high level, maybe I'll just read it through it again because it's quite a good way I've already sort of thought it through there. So lastly is a look at some technicals for emerging market equities. And interestingly enough, this chart both gives me cause for complacency and concern. On the complacency side, breadth is actually still at fairly decent levels, okay? And that uptrend line there has yet to be breached. And if that did get breached, that would be quite a bearish trigger for me. On the concern side is that while price has made higher highs, so that green line there, breadth seems to have put in a lower high, at least for now. And basically that's called bearish divergence, bearish breadth divergence. And bearish divergence can get resolved in a benign fashion, so it can be a false signal. But it can also give advance warning of a turning point. So, while I'm happy to continue to run with my core bullish medium-term view on emerging market equities, this is one of the things I am monitoring from a short-term risk management standpoint. The other things, as a side note, that I'm looking at are the price action in emerging market currencies, and also things like emerging market cyclicals versus defensives, and I haven't really seen any red flags there on either of those respects just yet. So back to this, obviously the coronavirus is probably the biggest risk for emerging market equities given the direct impact that it has on China, which is a big part of emerging markets. For now, I would say that it's not worst case scenario. I mean, it is a short-term negative. I mean, we can't deny that. But to add a bit of a counterintuitive perspective, there's a possibility that the coronavirus outbreak in China might actually trigger the, as I've noted there, thus far reluctant PBOC. They've actually been very reluctant. They've been very restrained relative to their own history and relative to other central banks around the world in terms of what they've been doing. They have been doing stuff, but not, by not even remotely close to what some other central banks have been doing. So it might trigger them to actually do a bit more forceful stimulus, which of course would actually end up providing greater upside scope for China-sensitive assets such as emerging markets and commodities. So to sum up these last three charts, I'm basically bullish on emerging market equities, but I'm definitely closely watching some of these key risk management triggers. So that brings us to the end of the sort of insights section, or the basically a walkthrough of the key insights. A fairly good example of what this report is like. So at this point, so I'll put the link here to the subscribe page. I'd love to have you on as a subscriber, and but if you have no interest, you can probably stop watching the video, but otherwise I'll show you how to do it. So it's a good idea to have a quick look at the terms of use. It's all the usual stuff, not financial advice, suitability, blah blah blah, privacy, all the rest of it. And also the FAQ, or troubleshooting. So how do I know if my subscription went through? PayPal will give you confirmation. PayPal doesn't seem to be working. Well, there's an alternative there. You can do it by Stripe if PayPal doesn't work, or if you don't like PayPal. How to change your email address, I'll actually show you by looking when you get the next edition of this, just go down to the bottom and click that there, update your preferences. And I haven't received any reports yet. What should I do? You might need to add my email there to your safe list to make sure that it gets through. And how do you unsubscribe? You just cancel your automatic payments in PayPal. It's pretty straightforward. I've got the explanation on how to do that there. So yes, to sign up, you just go to this website here and click, for example, on subscribe, and that'll take you through to PayPal, and then you just complete the steps there. As for why you might want to subscribe, so this is from the email where I kind of described why I was launching this. So we'll just go through them. So the right charts at the right time. It's not just a random assortment of charts or simple reference matter. I consider what's timely and relevant, i.e. what people are already thinking about, as well as arguably what they should be thinking about. And I think, the example that we worked through there is, a good example of that. Insightful comments and a so what. I mean, I like a chart for chart's sake, but I also understand that charts, even the more innovative and unique ones, are becoming more and more a commodity, and it's the insight that can be, more valuable, and especially if your audience is investors. Signal over noise. Similar to the previous point, I try to illuminate issues and add to the discussion about the risk-return outlook, rather than just putting stuff out there or just filling in the page. Easy to read. With all my work, I aim to make it easy to read and quick and efficient to assimilate the insights. So with my institutional service and throughout my research career, my mantra has been clear, concise, and insightful. So those that I've worked with have benefited from that standard, and that's a standard that I, set and demand from myself. I really, makes it very tough sometimes, but if you keep your standards high, lift them over time and maintain them, yes, it means that you're going to have a hard time, rising to those standards consistently, but in the end it produces good stuff. Cost effective, so yeah, just it's not very expensive. It's less than $2 a week. Unique charts, they're all my own and not copies from others' work. And actually, I find a lot of the time people copy my charts, but that's fine. It comes with the territory of being an innovator. And actually, innovation, coming up with new charts, new indicators, new ways of looking at things, is something I value, enjoy, and basically obsess over. So good mix. As you can probably gather from what we went through there, I maintain a good mix of macro and markets. Sometimes things can get a bit lopsided or tedious if you swing the pendulum too far in either direction here, or at least in my opinion. So I try to put usually you'll see that the first, two charts typically tend to be some sort of big picture macroeconomic kind of theme. The third and fourth charts tend to be very market focused and often end up being shorter term. And what I try to do is make the fifth chart something a bit longer term. For example, the other week I had the equity risk premium for the USA over the last 100 years. Add a bit of perspective, add a bit of longer term thinking there as well. So taste test, it also provides a good taste or entree of what I'm doing with the institutional service that may be more relevant to some than others. Backup, it's also a good alternative for those who trial out the institutional service but for whatever reason find themselves unable to sign up. Maybe that's budget issues or timing. Good way to keep connected with what I'm doing. And that's actually a good extra point as well, is that I try to put a lot on social media, but some weeks I'm just too busy doing, running my business. And if you sign up to this, then you're guaranteed to have stuff every week, because this is something that I do deliver every week. So there's the consistency aspect as well. And the last one, support the cause and stay connected. As I mentioned before, if you like my work, it's a good, relatively low-cost way to support the cause. So show some appreciation and keep connected with what I'm doing. And yeah, I'll say it again, but as I mentioned there, so when I'm traveling or busy with The social media blog content goes on the back burner, but this email will be a constant, so it's a great way to keep connected. So again, if you want to sign up, you just jump onto the website here and click whether you like annual or quarterly. And I'll leave it at that. If you've got any comments, questions, feedback, put them in the comment section below, and watch out for the next video.